Welcome to Rise Up in Business, the law podcast for small business owners. I'm your host, Tracy Myler-Crane. I'm a business lawyer, an entrepreneur, and very much a realist. Rise Up in Business is designed to share with small business owners important legal information and some clever tips and tricks in short and sharp episodes, no legal jargon. With this podcast, I want to empower small business owners to rise up and take control in their business. I'll be here every Wednesday to tell you what you need to know without sending you to sleep. Let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode in Season 3 of the Rise Up in Business podcast. I am so excited to be recording this season for you. I've got to admit, if I had have been asked 12 months ago if I would ever record and deliver a podcast, my answer would have been a hard and fast no. I genuinely thought that it would not be something that would lend itself well to my business and my practice areas, and I really thought that, to be honest, the process of recording and delivering would be overwhelming. But thanks to my most amazing and brilliant podcast editors at Bambi Media, the process has been an absolute breeze and they make it all happen so seamlessly. So super grateful to them to make it possible for me to be here recording the new season. So this season of the podcast is going to be a little different to the first two seasons, and that's because I'm really going to focus on providing real life illustrations or case studies, if you like, of certain issues, what goes wrong when, or if you don't have particular things in place, what can happen, because I'm really keen to add some context to the content that I've already delivered. I have received some incredibly generous and kind feedback in relation to the first two seasons of the podcast, and I'm really keen to continue to deliver practical information that small business owners can find useful and can implement straight away. So in my very first episode of Season 3, which is episode 16 of the podcast, I'm going to provide some context around business structures and what can happen in practical terms when we don't have the right business structure in our business. And it's not difficult to draw on examples for this, sadly, at the moment, because we saw a lot of people be caught out during the COVID period last year. So you would have heard stories, or you may have even been in a position where you were seeking advice from your accountant or professional advisor in relation to how the government stimulus packages may or may not apply to you and your business. And largely what that meant was that, sole traders really missed out significantly in terms of what was available under the stimulus packages. And a lot of the time I found people didn't realise that they had different choices when it came to their business structure. So I talked about the basics of business structure options in episode 3 of the podcast and gave a very high-level overview of the differences between the options available. What I didn't do is go into real-life examples and case studies of how people get caught out. That's what this season's all about. During the COVID period, what we saw were businesses who were being operated by a corporate entity, being a company, were far better off under the stimulus packages available because of various cash boosts and other payments, as opposed to the sole trader. What I found time and time again was that sole traders either didn't know they had other options, or they were putting it off and waiting until their business did a little better, until they made the decision to change over to a company. One client in particular found herself in real difficulty because she was in that category where she was just waiting a little longer until her business became more profitable before she made the change to a corporate structure. What that meant for her, unfortunately, is that she wasn't able to receive the benefits that businesses being operated as a corporate structure were able to receive. So that was a significant disadvantage. But what it also meant for this client in particular, in terms of asset protection, was that she was completely exposed. So we provided some advice to her in relation to her options to wind up her business if it came to that, which is one of the many businesses hit very hard during COVID. And because she was a sole trader, she was personally exposed for all of her business liabilities. So that was all of her providers, all of her suppliers, her lease payments in particular, and every other expense that her business incurred were all her personal liabilities, because she's a sole trader. So a sole trader is you as an individual operating your business as you as an individual, which means all the money that comes in is yours, but all of the liabilities are also yours. She did not have the benefit of any asset protection whatsoever. And she did have a home, which meant that this was a very real concern. I find this to be one of the very real pain points that's very common when people haven't necessarily got the best business structure in place for them. It's the asset protection and the exposure that they have personally. It can be helpful when starting a business to think, I'll give it my best, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. I'll wind it up and go and do something else. That's fine, provided we're taking into account the potential exposure that you may have for liabilities that business incurs along the way. So with the client that I'm talking about here today, we had to sit down with her and do an analysis of risk exposure. So that was taking into account all of the income that she could predict going forward over the next 6-month period and taking into account all of the expenses. And unsurprisingly, during that period for this particular industry, the expenses far outweighed any estimate of income for that period. What that meant was she was personally liable for all of those expenses, irrespective of what income was coming into her business. That's not a great position to be in, as you can understand. And she's not alone, because it happens very often when people keep putting it off or they're not aware. So the takeaway from what I've said so far in this episode is not having your business structure right can have a series of flow-on consequences. But the one I see most often is personal exposure for the sole trader, which largely could have been navigated differently if we had have had a company structure operating that business. It is super important to think long term and to include business structure in your planning for your business. There's real consequences if that doesn't happen. Another common issue that I see with business owners who aren't operating under the best business structure for them is when business owners reach a point in their business where they want to bring on another partner or they want to raise additional capital. Being a sole trader, that can be problematic because you're then faced with how you're going to receive that money. Is it going to be a loan? Are you going to need to enter into a formal partnership, or what terms might we need to negotiate? There is a lot more flexibility for clients when they are operating as a corporate structure and they're able to simply enter into an arrangement or an agreement where they can issue shares to an incoming investor, for example, or a partner. I helped a client at the end of last year change her business structure from a sole trader to a corporate entity for the sole purpose of bringing in an investor. So obviously we entered into a shareholder agreement and shares were issued under the new company, but it was a very complicated process for her with a lot of administration required to change that business structure. And she was under pressure given the time of the year and given the fact that she really needed the funds at that time of year. So flexibility is something that a corporate entity lends itself to far more than a sole trader structure. So those are just a couple of examples of what can go wrong or what the hiccups can be in business when you're not operating under the best business structure for you. Of course, there are loads more, but I've chosen those two for this episode because they really are the most common issues that at least I assist clients with, so I'm sure I'm not alone. That's it for today's episode, the very first episode of Season 3. By all means, if you have any questions, reach out. That's what I'm here for. And as always, I'd love any feedback you'd like to provide.
That's it for today's episode. Short and sharp, just like I promised. If you liked the episode, please be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes, and I would be most grateful if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts. As always, remember to keep your business legals in order with my annual legal checklist. You can grab your free copy by heading over to my website, tmsolicitor.com.au/checklist. I'll catch you next week. Thanks so much for listening.